Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dylan. This is All You Can Board, and this is video number 2 for the Sinister Motives expansion for Marvel Champions. If you missed our video yesterday, I took a look at Ghost Spider, the review, and today we're looking at Spider-Man, the Miles Morales version, which is the second hero that comes in this box. Very different hero, even though it's part of the Web Warrior, archetype and line of packs and heroes that we're getting. Very different playing hero, at least with the base deck that comes here compared to Ghost Spider. So you get pretty good contrast between the two heroes in the box. If you're curious about my thoughts on the box as a whole and the villains and going through the scenario, look forward to next weekend when I will have the full review of the box and need some more time with it before I can bring you that. But today, it's all about Spider-Man Miles Morales. So let's jump right in. There's no sense waiting any longer, and we'll kick things off, of course, with the alter ego. So the alter ego here is Miles Morales. He does have a recovery of 4, one more than the usual amount we see. Response here is after you change to this form, shuffle one Spider-Man card from your discard pile into your deck. So you don't have to use an action for anything like this. Anytime you flip to alter ego to do any sort of recovery, healing, you're just going to get one of your Spider-Man cards back into your deck, which again isn't like a super powerful ability that, it's not like as if you're getting it into your hand or something's going into play immediately, but some of the very powerful cards that you may have already used or you had to use for resources, you're able to get back. It's prolonging your deck as well. If you have a low deck, it's a card you're probably going to draw imminently as well. So pretty good ability, especially because it just triggers from changing forms. The other thing I will add in here is that Spider-Man only has a hit points of 9. It's pretty low for hit points, which means that the recovery of 4 and just spending time in alter ego is something you're probably going to be doing a lot of, or unless you're playing multiplayer and you have other ways to heal up or to defend yourself. But generally, especially if you're playing solo, you're going to be going to alter ego more than once to heal up, and the 4 recovery is really good there, as well as you're going to be getting all these Spider-Man cards back every time you do. So pretty good all around, but again, pretty low hit points, just something to consider. Flipping to the hero side, the Spider-Man side, really solid stat line. 2s all around, it's the same Captain America stat line, just really solid numbers. 2 special abilities here. Now, these special abilities are called special because they have to be triggered by other cards and other things that trigger these special abilities. You can't just choose to use them. So the first one is Venom Blast. Special, deal 2 damage to an enemy, stun that enemy as well. Very good. And Spider Camouflage, which is give Spider-Man a tough status card and confuse an enemy. So you'll notice that both of these together, you're able to confuse and stun enemies, which will come into play with some of the other cards we're going to look at. And of course, you're going to be able to do 2 damage and get a tough status card. All solid things if you're able to trigger them, frequently enough. And that's one of the things we'll get into as I talk about this deck, is that, I'm obviously basing this review, as I do with all heroes, off of the deck of cards that we are provided with in the box. So I haven't done any modifications to the deck quite yet because I want to go through all the cards, especially the new ones that they've included, and just see how that hero plays before I start doing customization. With the base deck that we have here, these special abilities are really cool, but I would say that they trigger a lot less than I was expecting them to, at least in my experiences playing with them. And obviously that's subjective. I could have just had bad luck. I could have, still been playing the hero a little bit incorrectly because, in terms of strategy, because, it's a brand new hero to the game. But I just will say that it has been a little bit hard to trigger those abilities at times, which sometimes makes Spider-Man feel a little bit weaker, perhaps, than he should be, than compared to when you do trigger them. But again, we'll get into that as we get into the cards. So the very first one we're going to look at here is 2 copies of Arachnobatics, which is my favorite card, one of my favorite cards, I should say, in his hero cards because of the potential, but there is a really big gap in potential here. So it's a 1-cost event that says hero action attack, deal 2 damage to an enemy. If that enemy has a stun status card, however, deal 3 additional damage to it. If that enemy has a confused status card, deal another 3 additional damage to it. So we can see how this pairs so much with the Spider-Man abilities. If you are able to have used the special abilities or from other means have stunned and confused the enemy that you're attacking, you're going to be doing 8 damage for 1 resource, which is obviously, I don't have to tell you, ridiculous value. That's sort of the top echelon, the pinnacle of what you want to try to achieve with this card. I will say that in all the games I played so far, I think I've hit that twice. Just because you have to have, sometimes the stars align to be able to pull that off. More often than not, I'm able to get the 5 damage for 1 really regularly, that is still really good value. I shouldn't underplay that and say that's not good. But to get the full 8 damage, you have to have this card in your hand. You have to potentially triggered both these specials recently, or have had other means to be able to stun and confuse the enemy. It's not always going to work out that way, but it is cool to have that potential. When it does hit, it feels really good. So I will say you're probably more likely to hit the 5 damage, and that is still really good value. Don't hold the card back because it's only 5 damage. 5 damage for 1, really, really good. When you hit the 8 damage though, it's going to feel great. All right, next up we have 2 copies of Double Life. This is a 1-cost event, max 1 per round. Action, change your form. If you paid for this card using a fist resource, a strength resource, ready your identity. Pretty good card, one that I will say that at first glance seems really, really powerful, and the power level is there if you're able to hit, obviously, that strength resource. But in my experience, in my games that I played, I used this far less than I think I was expecting to have used it. And maybe that's just the heroes that or the villains that I was playing against in situations where it was arising. It just wasn't making sense. It can sometimes just, be a result of bad luck or just strategical timing of when you get this card, even after multiple plays. But for me, it's not a free changer. Essentially paying 2 cards, this card and another one, to be able to change your form, to get an additional form change that turn, which again can be really useful. I think that the best opportunity to use this, honestly, is to change to Alter Ego using the regular change, like not using this card. Be able to heal, recover for 4 because he has a higher recovery than normal. You get that Spider-Man card back from your discard pile. Then you're able to use this card, flip back to Spider-Man, and then ready and still be able to use Spider-Man. So you're getting the recovery that normally you'd have to sort of retire to Alter Ego form, so to speak, for a turn or so, and you're able to do that and then jump back. That's the best way, in my opinion, to use it, at least in the experiences that I've had. Obviously, there's other ways you can use that. You can get creative in a whole bunch of different ways. You could, start an Alter Ego, go to Spider-Man, do some stuff, flip back to Alter Ego if you don't want to stay there and still accomplish stuff. But generally, that's where I was finding it, is that I didn't want to end the turn Alter Ego. I needed to heal up, and I was able to do so and still do a bunch of stuff in hero form. So it is a really good card. I just found that somehow in my experience, I was always defaulting to other things I wanted to do on my turn. But again, that could have just been the games that I was playing. Next up, we have 2 copies of Swing In. This is a 2-cost event, hero action thwart. Remove 4 threat from a scheme. If you paid for this card using a mind resource, resolve Spider-Man's spider camouflage abilities. The camouflage ability is the one that gives him a tough status card and confuses the enemy. So if you're able to hit that, obviously for 2, removing 4 threat and confusing the enemy and getting a tough status card is ridiculous value. For at that point, you would always play the card. The only stipulation, obviously, is you have to have paid for it with a mind resource. There are going to be times, as easy as that sounds, if you haven't, I didn't build the deck around this. I just used the cards that come in here, and there were plenty of mind resources, but for some reason I did have multiple times where I just wasn't able to find the combination of cards on the turn I was using, or I had this card in my hand, to hit that mind resource or to want to hit that mind resource when I wanted to do other things. Again, a lot of this character's potential comes out of being able to trigger those abilities to get extra incentives for using Arachnobatics, for just extra power level with stunning and confusing and getting, the situation under control with the villain. Swing In is one of your ways to do that. So it is a really important card. It is one you're going to want to try to hit whenever possible to trigger those special abilities, to get that extra power level flowing. If you're not hitting those specials very often, you're going to find that Spider-Man starts to feel like a bit of a weaker hero because you're just not realizing his full potential. So important card that you want to try to hit when possible, but again, you're going to need those mind resources to make sure you built your deck in a way that allows for you to have the options to do that. 3 copies, speaking of mind resources, here's the 3 copies of a card that has a mind resource. This is Web Shot, 2-cost event, hero action attack. This is almost like the attack version of Swing In. Deal 4 damage to an enemy, and if you paid for this using a energy resource, resolve Spider-Man's Venom Blast ability, which of course deals 2 damage and stuns an enemy. So it's the damage, the attack version of the thwart card we just looked at. I always gravitate towards damage dealing cards more than I do with threat removal. I just find it more interesting in terms of the games I play. So being able to do 4 damage for 2, turn that into 6 damage for 2 by triggering the special and stun the enemy, really, really good. All you have to do is have an energy resource. Again, sometimes you're not going to end up with one. This does have 3 copies compared to the 2 copies of Swing In, which means you're going to get more opportunities to hit that energy resource in case you draw the first one and you don't have the ability to hit it. You're gonna have 2 more chances as they come up to do so. And what's interesting to note is that web shot can be used to play for swing in, and swing in can be used to play web shot. So you're going to sometimes be able to try to trade them off depending on what the board looks like. If you need to remove a bunch of threat, you're going to cash in your web shot to use swing in. If you need to deal some damage, you're going to cash swing in to do damage with web shot. So that's a neat little, alternating between those cards. Those 5 cards I think will be used a lot in your play because of their ability to trigger the specials. All right, a couple interesting cards coming up here. So the first, they're both support cards. The first one is, I'm probably going to mispronounce this name. I'm not familiar with the comics. I don't know if it's, I think it's just Ganke Lee, but I'm not 100% sure. This almost seems like the a version, like a comic version of Ned from the MCU movies, or maybe Ned is a movie version of this character from the comics, but just with the fact that the flavor text says, "I'm the man in the chair," one of the lines from Spider-Man Homecoming or Far From Home, or both, that came up. So anyways, 2-cost support, action, exhaust Ganke Lee, draw 1 card. If you're in hero form, choose and discard 1 card from your hand. So this is basically just permanent card draw as long as this is out, with the caveat being that you get permanent, just a straight up card draw if you're in alter ego form, but if you're in hero form, you're gonna have to discard 1 card after you draw 1, so it becomes a bit of a worse ability. So you wanna be using this specifically when you're in alter ego form to get the full mileage, otherwise you're gonna have to discard a card, which it's still good. It's just at that point you're essentially trading a card from your hand in that you don't want for a better one, maybe depending on what you draw. In an alter ego form, you're just gaining a resource that you can use to spend, or gaining a card that you can play. So you wanna try to play this in alter ego form, and paired with double life. Is that what it's called? Yeah, double life, to be able to go to alter ego form and come back, for instance. You're able to use this a lot more than maybe in some heroes where you'd have to actually say, I have to go and decide to go into alter ego to use this. Now you can kind of find other opportunities to use Ganke Lee. So very interesting. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. Otherwise I've just said it like 3 or 4 times, and at that point I can't even cover up my mistakes. So the next support card is Jefferson Davis. So this is a 2-cost support. Persona does have shield as well. Alter ego action, exhaust Jefferson Davis, remove 1 threat from the scheme with the least threat. Honestly, maybe I'm undervaluing this card. Maybe I'm not placing enough emphasis on the fact that you're getting permanent threat removal that you can just do every single time you're in alter ego, so it adds up. But for me, I got Jefferson Davis into play early a couple games, and yes, I used it every single time I was in alter ego form. You can spend extra time in alter ego form with double life and other options, but I never really felt like that threat was a huge deal. For sure, there's times where it's helped me chip away at schemes that are in play to be able to, remove threat. But the fact that it's even limited, saying it has to be the one with the least threat, it's surprising to me. Like I don't feel like if they just would have said remove 1 threat from a scheme, that it would have been too powerful. So the fact that they've even limited the ability to only the one with the least threat is interesting to me. Generally, that's probably what's the one you're going to want to hit if you're only removing 1, but it just seems weird to limit a card that doesn't seem that powerful in general. In any way, shape, or form. It's not a bad card, and for sure, if you get it out early, being able to just every time you go to alter ego, just remove some extra threat is great. But I honestly never, it was one of the cards I kind of just forgot was in play sometimes. I forgot that it's helping me out, and I can't really identify, oh, it helped in this moment. It was the game changer in this play. It just sort of is there doing its function, chipping away at some threat removal, but that's really about it. So, and because you have so many other ways to remove threat, a lot of times it almost just seemed unnecessary to have Jefferson Davis, unless you really are just 1 threat short, which for sure will happen sometimes. That's just very situational. So that was my experience with Jefferson Davis. Next one is Power Within. This is a 1-cost upgrade. Hero response: after your hero uses a basic power, discard Power Within, resolve Spider-Man's Venom Blast ability. So this is a 1-time use. It has to be in play, and then it's going to be a free trigger on Venom Blast. Obviously, these cards are important, and I say cards because we're going to get into one that triggers Spider Camouflage next, but it's just a 1-time use thing. So you kind of have to have it in play at the opportune time to trigger it, and you have to hope that when you're triggering it, it also is at that point probably going to help you with Arachnobatics if you have it in your hand to be able to get its full mileage. When I said that there wasn't many ways to trigger these abilities, it really comes down to Power Within, the card we're going to look at next, and your Web Shot and Swing In. So those are your 4 ways, and for sure, like that's basically 7 cards out of 15 they can trigger them. So it's nothing to sneeze at, but it's less somehow than I was expecting, because I guess what I was expecting was that there would be a card that can kind of stay in play or some permanent way without having to get lucky with your draws at the opportune time, that you'd be able to trigger these specials, and generally it's a little bit harder than I was expecting. So again, that makes Power Within very important, as well as the next card we're going to look at. You just have to find the right time to use them to hopefully be able to combo to your max potential to get the most value out of Spider-Man. Next up, we have Defense Mechanism. So this is a 1-cost upgrade. After your hero uses a basic power, discard Defense Mechanism, resolve Spider-Man's Spider Camouflage ability. So it's the same thing we just looked at, but with Spider Camouflage, that'll give you a confuse on the villain, as well as a tough status card for Spider-Man. So kind of the same. There's nothing really more to say about that one compared to Power Within. They both are important cards in your kit. They are temporary, but again, getting them out at the right time to be able to combo into cards like Arachnobatics, or just get more out of your turn and control the villain, things like that, is obviously really important. And lastly, we have 2 copies of Web Shooter. Really great card. 1-cost upgrade. It has 3 uses, 3 web counters that come on it. Hero resource, exhaust Web Shooter, and remove 1 web counter to generate a wild resource. And you have 2 copies of these. They can both be out at the same time. So you do across both these cards get 6 uses of adding wild resources into play. Those wild resources are really important because of the conditions on that thwart card and the attack card that require mind resources and energy resources. This is going to allow you to hit those at any time you want by having these out. So that's what makes them extra important, on top of the fact that obviously just having access to wild resources and resources in general allows you to do more with your hand. We've seen these across other heroes. It is always more important when it's wild. It's always extra important when that hero also has specifically cards that need to be specific resources, and now you have an extra way to get them with this. So really important card. You're going to be hoping to get this early to get it into your kit to give yourself more mileage on what you're able to do. Okay, let's jump into the Justice cards. So the first one we're going to look at is a brand new ally, and that is Monica Chang. So before actually we get into this, I just want to mention the big thematics here, besides the fact that Spider-Man is a web warrior and will fit into those type of decks as well. What we see across a bunch of the cards here is the shield archetype, and I don't know if this is going to be something that expands much beyond this pack. I don't know if we're going to see a bunch of shield cards pop up in other hero packs, even in just the additional cards that are included in packs, or just cards that happen to have the shield trait or something that you're gonna be able to get more deck building possibilities. But we do see a lot of it here. It'll be interesting to see how it expands, and they are trying to push, I think, some of this Justice stuff to shield. So Monica Chang is a shield ally, 3 cost, 2 health, 1 thwart, 1 attack. The response is after Monica Chang enters play, search your deck, hand, and discard pile for a copy of Surveillance Team support card and put it into play, and place 1 snoop counter on each surveillance team you control. What makes this card so interesting, I think I mentioned this in the preview of this expansion too, is that it calls out a very specific card. Like, you would never build a deck with Monica Chang in it if you didn't have Surveillance Team in the deck. It would be entirely pointless, I think. If someone wants to comment in the comments with a really effective way you would build a deck with Monica Chang and no Surveillance Team, by all means, but I feel like there's always going to be a better solution at that point. So you're really having to sort of put that little package in your deck, but it is going to power up Surveillance Team. And the idea that they're including new cards in Marvel Champions that say, here's this old card, and here's a way we're going to bring it back and power it up if you use this specific card, is something I actually love. And the reason I love this is because it encourages people to go back to cards that already exist, cards you may not have been deck building with. It encourages people who have older content to get more value out of their older content, which is, one, just super interesting, but 2, for people who don't buy, every single pack and rely on some of the, older cards that they have popping up more often and things like that, being able to have a new card come out and get a pack that says we're going to add more value to these cards you already own, I just think is really, really great. I'm a big fan of that. I hope we see more of this. I would love to see more of it. So it is really interesting. If I don't have Surveillance Team here because it's an older card and I always cover only the new one, so I can't even remember all of what it does. I think it has like 3 counter, I can't remember the cost, but it has 3 counters on it, and I believe every time you remove a counter, you're removing 1 threat from a scheme, essentially. So this is going to give it 4 counters instead of 3. You're going to get an extra use out of it, which means you're now going to be able to remove 4 threat with Surveillance Team. But again, you place 1 snoop counter on each Surveillance Team you control. So if you manage to have 2 or 3 in play, suddenly you're going to have an additional 3 threat removal across the board. So if you're playing a Justice hero, if you're playing multiplayer and your role is to remove threat, this is just going to power up your cards, power up your your support cards to be able to do more. Beyond that, Monica Chang doesn't really have much else use besides being a blocker. Her 1 thwart, 1 attack is not going to be something you're necessarily like relying on unless you really need to chip away or remove a tough status card or something like that. Generally, you're going to play Monica Chang, get the value on with Surveillance Team, and then have her block and lose her, which at that point, good card, more interesting than I would say powerful, but I appreciate how interesting the card is. Next up, we have a new version of Spider-Woman. This is a Justice Ally, 3 cost, 3 health. She is a web warrior and shield, so she can function both. 1 thwart, 2 attack. I like that she's, again, the whole dual, double agent thing with shield web warrior. The way they find ways to thematically bring this back in is always great. 1 thwart, 2 attack, 2 consequential damage on the attack. Reduce the cost of play Spider-Woman by 1 for each confused enemy in play. Really interesting because, again, it's situational. You're going to deck build a specific way to include Spider-Woman in your deck. You're not just going to throw it into any Justice deck. But if you've built your deck around the ability to have multiple ways to confuse enemies, which again already helps Miles Morales Spider-Man out in general, so that might be an option for you to build Miles Morales around, having Spider-Woman in that deck could be phenomenal because, again, if you're playing Spider-Woman for 1 cost to get a 3 health ally, they can also do 2 attack and 1 thwart. I mean, that is really good. And there could be situations where you're really lucky and it's free. So really powerful potential of Spider-Woman. It's just going to be really dependent on your ability to build the deck around that, which I think is totally fair and totally fine. I like when cards are powerful but not universally powerful. It's based on how you build your deck. All right, next up we have Homeland Intervention. This is a 0 cost event. It is a shield card as well. Action: exhaust up to 3 shield cards you control and choose a scheme. Remove 2 threat from that scheme for each card exhausted this way. It's cards like these when they come in that really help boost and power up an archetype. The shield archetype is in its infancy. Obviously, we're just seeing the birthing of it. Not that we haven't had shield cards before, but when they're really starting to bring in all this synergy across them all. Building a shield deck, especially if it's Justice, you just don't ever not include this card. To have the potential to remove 6 threat for 0, again, you do have to exhaust these cards, and if you're exhausting a card like, Surveillance Team that could already have removed 1 threat, it's like you're exchanging the 1 threat for 2, 1 threat removal for 2, so it's not the full, like, you can look at it as 0 for 6, but really you sacrifice some threat removal as well, but still really, really good. It also is just always going to depend which cards you're exhausting, what your situation is. It has the flexibility if you just need to remove 2 threat or 4 threat. Again, this is a free card. You're just able to just play it and just exhaust whatever you need to in that situation. That flexibility is really good, and of course, it's just helping a shield archetype that is threat removal do what it does best to a really high power level. So really important card if you're wanting to build around shield archetypes, and if you don't, it's probably a completely useless card. Next up, we have Global Logistics. This is another 0 cost event. It is also a shield card. Exhaust 1 shield card you control. Look at the top 4 cards of a player's deck or the encounter deck. Discard any number of those and put the others on the top and or bottom of that deck in any order. Really powerful potential in this card, but again, it's going to depend what you find when you go in there. The fact that you can look at 4 cards and they offer you the choice of which deck to use. You can use this for the villain deck to say, what's coming up, what knowledge do I want to have about what's coming up so I can prepare for it, or if are there powerful cards coming up that I don't want to have to deal with that I can throw onto the bottom of the deck so that they come up later. I can discard them outright if I don't mind speeding up the deck's discard rate. I can look at my own deck and I can prepare for what I want to draw next, or perhaps even this turn, depending on what's going to trigger. Lots of flexibility there. Not always going to be like, because it's 0 cost, you're gonna have tons of options to use it. You're never gonna feel bad using it, but there are gonna be times where you think like, there's just something else I'd rather do this turn. I'm gonna use this as a resource. Looking at 4 cards, getting information isn't what I'm looking to accomplish. I want to do damage, I want to do threat removal. You're not going to use it all the time. You may not even be including 3 copies of this in your deck, but it has the potential to really help you plan and prepare for what's coming up next, which is obviously really good. And then lastly, we have 3 copies of Field Agent. These are all shield cards we've looked at. This one's no different. 1 cost support, uses 3 backup counters. Hero Interrupt: when a shield ally would take any amount of consequential damage, exhaust Field Agent and remove 1 backup counter from it, prevent 1 of that damage. Really strong potential here. Again, it's going to be completely dependent on you building your deck around shield allies and the shield archetype. But if you're able to do that and you have some really powerful allies in play, extending their lifespan up to 3 times, potentially, you know, if they only are going to take 1 consequential damage, being able to have 3 times have them take 0 and use that ally more often. I mean, I don't know, I can't think of all the shield allies right now off the top of my head, nor am I going to get into them, but just the fact that they exist and the fact that I know for a fact there are some out there that only take 1 consequential damage, we've gone over some today, that longevity is obviously really good. I think Field Agent is affordable, it's only 1 resource cost, and you're going to extend the life of some of your really powerful cards that before you potentially have to block with them and have them, you know, exit and be on the way out. So really powerful card, but again, really dependent on the shield archetype. All right, it's time to go into the basic cards, and believe it or not, we got 4 new basic allies in this pack, which I'm trying to think, and I obviously won't know the answer to this off the top of my head, but if that's the most amount of new basic allies we've ever gotten in a pack, in a single hero deck in general, because that just seemed really crazy to me and really exciting, obviously, because I'm someone who loves the ally cards more than anything. So the first one is a new version of Agent 13, Sharon Carter, 4-cost ally, 4 health, 2 thwart, 1 attack, a consequential damage on each. Response after Agent 13 attacks or thwarts, choose a shield support, ready that support. So this is obviously just meant to help the shield archetype. It's going to, you know, potentially, let's say you exhausted your shield support cards for, I'm forgetting the name of all these cards, for Homeland Intervention, to be able to use that and get more removal. Now you're able to ready that support with Agent 13 just by her doing her thwarting or her attacking like she normally would to get more uses out of them, which is likely going to just mean more threat removal for you. So that's why it's a little bit less excited for me personally. Justice is probably my least favorite of the aspects in Marvel Champions. It kind of flips between leadership and justice usually, but leadership has gained in popularity for me recently because of some of the new archetypes we got and the new ways you can play leadership these days. But so for me, it's less exciting to just say, oh, I'm readying cards to allow me to move more threat. I understand that's for sure important, and being a good threat remover, especially in multiplayer, someone needs to do that, and this is going to help you do that. So it's a good card. It is expensive, and it's just not as exciting to me personally to play, but that doesn't detract from the fact that if you're building a Justice Shield deck, you're likely going to include Agent 13 if you can get over her slightly higher cost. All right, speaking of higher cost, Dum Dum Dugan, 5-cost ally, 5 health though, 3 thwart, 3 attack, but 3 consequential damage on the thwart and 2 consequential damage on the attack. So wild stats all around here. The interrupt, when you use one of Dum Dum Dugan's basic powers, exhaust up to 3 shield cards you control. For each card exhausted this way, Dum Dum Dugan gets +1 to that power for this use. So obviously, if we want to look at the highest value you can get out of this card, that means that you could do 2 attacks, three attacks of 6 with the Dum Dum Dugan before he dies, which is 18 damage for 5 cost, or you could do 2 thwarts for 12 total thwart for 5 costs as well. So obviously the power level is there. Like, if you're able to get him out and use him to his full potential, it's going to be a huge swing for you. This has the potential to be a great card. At 5 cost, you have to have a 6-card hand without having, the double resource paying cards and things like that. So you potentially might have to use your entire hand just to play him. So I think this is one of those cards where you're going to want to include this in a deck where you have ways to cheat out allies, or to have a lot of ways to get extra resources to be able to pay for these. You have, your web shooters in play, you have other things to make this more affordable to play. Otherwise, it's just always going to be a little too steep to be able to get into play when you still have to hit another condition of exhausting shield cards to be able to see his full potential. That being said, if you've built a shield deck around this idea, if you have some cards to help you get him into play, hitting 3 attacks with Dum Dum Dugan for 6 each time potentially, or even 5 each time or 4 each time, like, that's a lot of damage being thrown around that is going to make him really worth it, but it's just going to be sometimes really hard to get those situations to arise. Again, it's going to require some deck building finesse, but I think it's really cool that we have a card like that, and I think it'll be exciting to see what decks people come up with. Then we have a Ghost Spider, the Gwen Stacy ally. So this is a 3-cost, 3 health ally with 1 thwart, 2 attack. Play only if you control a Web Warrior card. If you're play in Web Warrior archetypes, you almost 100% will. Interrupt: when Ghost Spider leaves play, search your deck for an identity-specific event and add it to your hand, and then shuffle. So really good ability. We often see, we have already in this in this review seen cards that get added from your discard pile into your deck and shuffled in. Specifically, this one is searching your deck for an identity card and putting it into your hand. Cards that tutor out specific cards for a situation you might be needing, even when they're restrictive, saying it has to be, an identity-specific event. Those are generally the best events that you're going to have in your deck because of power level. So you're going to be searching for a really powerful card that is specific to what's going on right now, adding it to your hand to be able to play it immediately. That alone is always very powerful. So the fact that Ghost Spider comes out, has the potential to do 6 damage, or 6 damage, or do 4 damage and block an attack, and then by dying, get you a specific card in your hand that you're able to use again. Like, there is a ton of power level here, and because it's basic, I think that across a bunch of Web Warrior decks, you're going to see this card pop up because every deck, every aspect can include it. So, nothing that's, I think phenomenal, because when you have basic cards that are too good, they just end up getting included in every deck. And the fact that it's restricted to Web Warrior, will limit this a little bit already. But I think, again, in Web Warrior archetypes, why would you not include this, at least to try it out to see if it works because of what it's getting you? And then the final new ally, the Peter Parker version of Spider-Man, gets a new basic ally. This is a 3-cost, 3-health ally with 2 thwart, 2 attack, great stats all around. Requirement, though, of an energy, a mind, and a strength resource. So you have to pay 1 of each resource of further your 3 resources you're playing to be able to play this card. Very restrictive. You have to pay for those. Again, you're going to want mind resource. You're going to want wild resources to help you do that, or just have good variety in your deck, because hitting those in every single hand when you want to play Spider-Man sometimes going to be a little bit challenging. It limits you. You can't really use cards that produce 2 mind resources or cards that produce 2 strength resources are kind of duds with Spider-Man, so that makes it even extra tough to play him, because a lot of times those cards are used to play allies. The response here, though, is after Spider-Man attacks or thwarts, choose another Web Warrior character you control and ready that character. You're going to be able to do that up to 3 times because of him only taking 1 consequential damage. So you're going to ready a character up to 3 times by having him in play while he's doing his potentially 6 thwarts, 6 damage. A pretty good card overall. Again, pretty restrictive on playing him. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be that restrictive for the ability. The ability is obviously really good, and it's going to make its way into Web Warrior decks. It just seems extra restrictive being able to hit play, and I wonder if that's going to create a bit of a barrier sometimes of people not including the Spider-Man in their deck, because it just turns out that it's too situational. There's too many times we end up saying, I can't meet this, or I don't want to meet this, and so I'm just going to use this as a resource. But it'll be interesting to see. Cool potential there. Really awesome shield card is coming up here. This is probably, of all the shield cards I played with in my games with Miles Morales, this is the one that most set the archetype up for success. That is Government Liaison, and it is a basic card, obviously, so we can, any shield deck can include this, although obviously right now that would likely be Justice is the one that's being built. 2-cost support, exhaust Government Liaison, play a shield card from your hand, reducing its resource cost by 1. Being able to reduce cards cost and when you play them is obviously really good, even though it only says it's 1. It's just that will facilitate so much stuff. If you have a card that's already 1, it's going to be free. Sometimes you want to play multiple cards in your turn, you're just 1 resource shy to play them all. Having cards like this to facilitate getting more cards into play, getting more done in your turn, especially for a specific archetype, is just going to help you do more. So again, it's not like it's earth-shattering, it's not like it's this makes the archetype, but in many ways it facilitated the archetype and really helped it function in the games that I played, just by allowing me to do more with all the cards. Once you've played a lot of your shield cards, sure, it's just going to sit there, but it is a pretty good card still. The last basic card is Sky Destroyer. So this is a 3-cost support. It is a shield vehicle. Response: after you play a shield card, exhaust Sky Destroyer to deal 2 damage to an enemy. It's a good card because in a shield archetype, you're going to be playing lots of shield cards, and every time you do, you just simply exhaust this to deal 2 damage. And it's just really going to be dependent on how early you get this out. I mentioned with Plan B in the Ghost Spider deck how effective that card is, getting it out early and just constantly being able to do 2 damage. To me, that was a way better card than Sky Destroyer, and I could be missing something here. You know, it really depends on you know, how you built your deck, but that stipulation was you discard a card at random. However, you can do that at the end of your turn when you know exactly what's left in your hand and potentially don't care about what you discard, so the randomness almost doesn't matter, and that's giving you 2 damage. This one, you're not losing anything. You're not having to sacrifice anything or pay anything. You're just getting the 2 damage by playing cards you would otherwise play. However, it really comes down to how often you're playing shield cards. So you have to be playing a shield card every turn for this to do 2 damage every turn, which may be possible. Maybe something that, you know, is easy to hit. If you get this out in your first turn of the game, this could easily be doing you like, you know, 16 to 20 damage every single game over the course of how many you've played. But it is really just going to depend on how many shield cards you're playing. What are you building a deck that is, you know, 90% shield cards, so you're constantly playing shield cards, or did you just sort of like lean into the shield archetype for some stuff, and at that point you probably don't include Sky Destroyer? So good potential there. It'll really just evolve as we get more shield cards in the game. All right, going on to the obligation. This is keeping secrets. Give to the Miles Morales player. You may flip to alter ego form, choose exhaust Miles Morales, remove keeping secrets in the game. Pretty standard, we've seen it before. Or discard Ganke Lee and Jefferson Davis from play. If neither was discarded this way, this card gains surge. Discard this obligation. So either way, you can choose to do the bottom option, even if you don't have those cards in play. You could, if you don't have either of those supports in play, your other option here is just discard and surge, which honestly, sometimes you may want to do if you don't want to exhaust Miles Morales and have to flip to alter ego form. Just saying, sure, I'll surge into something else just so I can keep this going, and I don't mind discarding this. Having that option is great. It makes it a really flexible obligation that isn't always going to slow you down. If you have Ganke Lee and Jefferson Davis in play, for sure that makes it a lot worse to do that second option. But again, I didn't find Jefferson Davis to be wholly that like valuable. We're losing him, I'd be devastated. Ganke Lee for sure is getting you card draw. I think that one is a little bit tougher to swallow, a tougher pill to swallow, losing that card. But again, I don't think losing either one is necessarily that detrimental that you're going to say, oh, I don't want to do that and lose them. But again, if you wanted to go to alter ego anyways, you can do that and then, you know, get off the hook without really doing much. All right, going into the Nemesis minion. This is Prowler. 5 health, 1 scheme, 2 attack, stalwart. When revealed, if you are in alter ego form, give Prowler a tough status card. Interesting card. So the stalwart obviously makes this a lot more difficult to deal with. The 5 health, it means that it's going to take you potentially a little bit longer to deal with as well. And he does have 2 attack, nothing overly powerful, but a little bit more of a nuisance. It's just interesting that if you are in alter ego, he's also going to get the tough status card, which makes him a lot tougher to deal with. And you're going to be in alter ego, which means that it's going to, you have to, you know, you can't deal with them right then and then. You're going to have to flip to be able to do stuff and whatnot. So, and then the first attack will just be eliminating the tough status card. So nothing, you know, too crazy powerful or difficult to deal with, but it is going to be a bit of a nuisance, more annoying than anything to deal with than some of the other Nemesis minions we've seen. Next, we have Tracking Prey. This is the side scheme. When revealed, you have 4 threat to start on this. It does have the acceleration icon. When revealed, if you are in alter ego form, place 1 acceleration token here. So this has the potential to really spiral out of control if you leave it in play too long. So I shouldn't say spiral out of control. It's not like it's you know, growing. It's only when it's revealed. But I just mean like it's really going to slow you down and hamper things as longer this stays in play if you're in alter ego form. So as we're seeing with the Nemesis minion in this, you're punished more if you're in alter ego when these cards come up, and that is because Miles is a character that, you know, wants to go to alter ego and spend time there, and so this is going to punish you for being there. It incentivizes you to, when you're playing Spider-Man Miles Morales, to, you know, flip to alter ego, do what you need to do, and flip back with double life so you don't have these cards hit their double effect. But it's cool that they kind of, you know, realize this hero is going to be one that wants to spend time in alter ego and added these cards that are going to punish you specifically for being there. Then we have a Razor Claws. This is the attachment. Gives you +2 attack, or sorry, not you, gives the enemy +2 attack. Attached to the minion with the highest printed hit points, not remaining. If you cannot, this card gains surge, so if there's no minions in play, it's just going to surge. The attached minion's attacks gain piercing. So +2 attack and piercing to the minion that has the highest printed hit points. Honestly, pretty basic all around, but it's just going to be make you prioritize removing whatever minion it gets put onto. So whatever minion gets this, you're going to have to get rid of immediately. It's going to make it, you know, a lot harder to deal with if you don't. So that's really all the card's doing. There's nothing otherwise too flashy about it. Lastly, 2 copies of Slice and Dice. This is the Treachery. When revealed, Prowler attacks the player with the fewest remaining hit points, even if that player is in alter ego form. If that attack defeats a character, or no attack was made this way, this card gains Surge. Really tricky card here. The fact that this can still attack you in alter ego means you do not get off the hook, and this could surge into something else by defeating a character, or if no attack was made this turn, if there's some reason they couldn't attack. But just a really high potential on the power level scale there, depending on the situation the card gets drawn in. It's going to be a card you hate to see, but shouldn't ruin your day too much. But again, because it's the fewest remaining hit points, it could lead to things that you didn't want to happen happening, like characters dying. So that is Slice and Dice. That is Miles Morales Spider-Man. So I'm not going to talk too much about comparing the 2 heroes, even though both videos are out. I think I'm going to leave that for the actual review of Marvel Champions Sinister Motives in general. But what do I think of Miles Morales as Spider-Man? I think it's a really interesting hero that introduces a new archetype with S.H.I.E.L.D. with all these cards. But I would say that I in no way think that S.H.I.E.L.D. The S.H.I.E.L.D. archetype is going to be my favorite way at all to play Miles Morales. So far, I'm not the biggest fan of the S.H.I.E.L.D. archetype. I think that it's interesting. I think it can be powerful. I'm just not finding it, stimulating to play that archetype. It's not super fun, and that honestly might just be because Justice is not my favorite aspect. So this is really, take this with a grain of salt and know that this is coming from my admitted bias of this being one of my lesser favorite aspects to play currently anyways. That adding on the S.H.I.E.L.D. archetype isn't necessarily invigorating me to play it, and the deck that they gave Miles here wasn't the most interesting version, I think, of Miles that will exist. I'd much rather play Miles in some other archetypes and see how he plays. I'm really excited to play Miles in Web Warrior archetypes because I think that is a really powerful deck type. But overall, I think a lot of what Miles comes down to is how often can you trigger those specials. You're going to have to put some sort of emphasis on making sure you're getting those combos right, triggering them at the right moments to be able to power up Arachnobatics, to be able to do more in your turn. When you can't trigger those at the opportune times, or when you want to and you have Arachnobatics in your hand and you can't hit them, it's just going to feel disappointing. That's the tough thing to kind of get around. There was many times where I had Arachnobatics in my hand and I couldn't even hit for the 5, and so it's just sort of like this potential I'm looking at that I'm like, I wish I could use this, but I can't. There are thankfully ways to get those cards out of your discard pile if you use them for resources back and use them again, so it's good that those exist. It just sometimes leads to disappointing moments that you would feel obviously a lot better if you're hitting the 5 damage or the 8 damage or triggering those specials more often. So I will say that there is lots of potential here. The Web Warrior archetype is really powerful. We're only going to see Miles get more powerful as more of these decks come out. That is just a given because we're getting more options to play around with, and he was still very fun to play. I just have some concerns about how often the special is going to be hit, and also just the S.H.I.E.L.D. archetype in general. I'm curious to see how that evolves, but I think a lot of your enjoyment, at least of this base deck as it comes in this form, is going to be on how much you enjoy playing Justice S.H.I.E.L.D. specifically. That is the second hero in Sinister Motives. So you've now seen both of my reviews on both these heroes. I'm going to have a full expansion box review next weekend about all the villains, the entire campaign in general, and comparing both these heroes together. So look out for that. It'll probably be coming out Sunday or Monday next week, depending on how much time I need to play everything. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching both these videos and sticking with our Marvel Champions content. I'm really glad to have new Marvel Champions stuff in my hands. Pretty soon, we'll probably be getting, I don't know if it's later this month, I think it's May, we're getting 2 new heroes. I think it's Nova and Ironheart, if I'm not mistaken, which are both really exciting heroes that I can't wait to get. So there's lots more Marvel Champions content coming, and I'm sure we'll have new preview articles soon. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to join our Discord or support us on Patreon or buy some merch or anything like that, find more info in the description. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next time.